I'm sorry, let me start over. I started the recording now. So we're going to go through the steps to create a project application and complete that. So as I said in part one, a good way to approach eSnaps is to look at the left-hand side and just work your way down. So in the part one training, we worked in the applicants link. We updated our project or our applicant profile by clicking on this folder. So that should be your very first step. Go in to that folder, go to the very end of that workflow, push edit, and then start uploading your updated forms for that applicant profile. After that's completed, you'll go down to funding opportunity registrations. Okay, here is where you're going to tell eSnaps that you need to create a project application folder. So you're going to see down through here there are several funding opportunity names. Now if you've recently completed your APR, you know that you would click on that to register. We'll complete the planning project application, so we'll click there to register. For the rest of you, you'll either use this link or this link. And I think the majority of you will be using the renewal register form. So that's what I'm going to show in my sample. You simply click on it and then click back, and it says that you have registered to create a folder. That's all you do on that page. Then you go down to the link that says projects. Now this is important. What you do is you first go to the funding opportunity name, click on the drop-down menu, drop down to Renewal Project Application Fiscal Year 2014. Obviously, if it's a new project application and you registered for that in the funding opportunity registrations, you'll have that as an option, so you would choose that. Again, for most of you, it's the renewal project application. So click on that, and you're going to see something new pop up. This little piece of paper with an orange plus, that is going to allow you to add a new project. You can see below that I've already added one project for my sample, and that's the one we'll go through when we get to the point later in the agenda where we're completing the project application. But if you need to create your project folder, you use your drop-down menu after you've clicked on the funding opportunity registrations, and then this will show up. Click on the paper, and then you can name it what you want. I would really encourage you to name it using the years. And I always like using the project year. So if, say, the grant that you're applying for will start, say, March 2015, and it will go through February 2016, then call your project Transitional Housing 2015/16. Something like that. It will make it a lot easier for you to find in eSnaps later on, and it will also make it a lot easier for me to find in eSnaps later on.
Would you repeat that?
Yes, Carol. So when you're naming the applicant project name, try not to use the same name every year. You can use your project name, but just attach the project year onto it. So for you, Carol, it would probably be I think Doorways Home is Texarkana. But I'll use Doorways Home as an example. Doorways Home 2015/2016. That way, whenever I look at it, among the list of the many applications and performance reports that you submitted, it stands out to me. It also stands out to you, so you don't just go searching for that application to work on every time you go into eSnaps. And I think that you've done this in the past, Carol. So does everyone understand that? If you don't, I think you'll understand once you see the next level down under the submissions. So you can see that I've created 2 renewal project applications for the 2014 competition. And this is what you'll do if you have two projects, like Carol does at Safety. If you are a agency that has one renewal application, of course, you'll just create one project application folder. So what this does is this creates your folder. This is all you need to do in this section. And so where we are on the agenda, I should have went to this earlier, we have already gone through registering your project application, and we just created your project applicant folder. You don't see it yet because you're just in the section where it's created. In the next section, you'll see it. So again, you work your way down on the left-hand side, click on Submissions. And what you might see when you first come in is something like this. It may show all projects. So see, even this with the sample that I've just been using for, I think, the past 3 years, you can see I've already started to build up a lot of different folders. So if I just had Sampleville on there, I would see a bunch of Samplevilles, and I'd have to look over at the dates, and the dates aren't really that useful for the way they do it in eSnaps. So unless I include the project year onto it, it's going to be hard for me to find. Now, of course, you can look at your renewal project application fiscal year 2014, but that will sometimes be confusing as well, because you may make a mistake and create several folders for that particular year. And keep in mind, once you create a folder, it will stay in eSnaps. It can't be deleted. So try to make the folders distinct from one another as possible. And then I'm going to work in this folder for a few pages, and then I'm going to go back up to this one just because it's going to be easier for me to explain. Harold, do you have something?
Can you edit the name of it before you close it out? Like if you put something.
Okay, I didn't catch the end of that. Can you edit the name of it?
Okay, Eric?
Go ahead.
Okay, can you edit the name of the project once you've already put it in?
Once you've gone beyond this step, let me go back to the project step. Once you've gone to this step and you've created the name in here and then you've clicked Save, then it's saved.
Okay.
Yeah. I wish that it was editable, but it's just not.
Okay.
So, yes, it makes things very confusing, especially for some of your projects. I have a hard time finding exactly what application to look at. But we always get there. But just, if you would, make it easier by including the project year in your name. Okay, so I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions here at this time, and feel free to ask some questions. I went through that pretty fast. I can go through those steps again if you want me to. Okay, looks like a couple of questions have been written in. Oh, no. Okay, those are just people saying that they just logged on. So, no questions yet. But thanks for the questions you asked, Carol. And everyone, feel free to ask questions. And please do ask questions, because we don't have as much time in this competition as we had last year to help you out. So do not be afraid to ask a question. If you have a question about this, most likely someone else does too. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the folder I just created so I can show you how everything gets started in these first few pages. Okay, now this could be a little slow for you because there will be a lot of people on eSnaps across the country. And the more people that are on it, the slower it gets, so just be patient with it. It's not near as slow as it used to be for those veterans out there with eSnaps. You know that it used to be really bad, but it still can get slow. Okay, as always, read the instructions that they provide. Read the guidance they provide. Again, it's on our website, and it's on HUD Exchange. So use that as much as you can. For the majority of you, you will go into the Renewal Project Application or Applicant Instructional Guide. If you are applying for a new project, you'll go here. So I would print that out, keep that by your desk while you're going through this application. I'm also going to make available this sample that I'm showing you with notes. And they're going to look like this, the notes will. So if you get it and the note is minimized, all you have to do, this is a PDF, if you see a highlighted section, you can either double click on it to maximize it, or you can right click and open all pop-ups. And then you can read the instructions, or it could be just hints I gave you, something like that. So I'm hoping that will be helpful. I will email that out to everyone after we're done. That's just something I created last night as I was going through and creating this sample grant. Okay, so you get started. Now it looks like there's not much to this, and I gotta say, this person's not on the call, so I can say this. I won't call this person out, but someone actually completed this and tried to submit it to me and said, I'm done. Well, this is not it. Trust me, this is much longer than this, and if you enter the correct information, this will expand when that information is entered. So do not think it's as small as this. Okay, when you go through each page, remember that you can look at the instructions by clicking on Show, and I would just encourage you to do that with every page that allows you to do that. Just go through and read that. It's going to take longer for you to fill it out, but you're going to make sure that you do it correctly. Then when you're done reading it, you can hide it if you want. Okay, the next thing you're going to look at is for any red lettering. If you see some red lettering, then you know something hasn't been entered or something has been entered incorrectly. In this case, the one thing that needs to be entered, the one thing with the asterisk, is the Federal Award Identifier. Now, this is something that you're going to find on your grant inventory worksheet, and I'm going to use a sample here, just because if you try to make one up, the system will reject it. It's a 13-digit identifier, but the different parts of it identify your local CPD office, the year in which you were granted funding, and I believe the type of grant. So those numbers all mean something. So bear with me while I find that number. I'm almost there. Okay. So don't use this number, use your own number. Okay, it's already showing up. Now you can see if you miss one part of the number and click Save, you'll still see that that red note shows up. So make sure to put the correct number in there. Anytime you have an asterisk or red lettering on a page, I would, after you enter the information, don't do Save and Next. Just click Save to make sure it's correct. Because you don't want to get to the end and,
I have a question.
well, you don't want to get to the end and then find out that there's a lot of incorrect pages still there. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. The number that I have that I'm using right now is different. I just got the award letter for this coming year. Our grant starts at January 1st. Which one do I use? The one starting in January 1st or the one that we're in right now?
You're going to use the one, I would just go by the one on the grant inventory worksheet.
Okay. Okay.
Because later on what this is going to do is the system will pull this number into another field later on that is the field for the expiring grant number.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So click Save and Next. After you've hit Save and everything looks good, hit Save and Next. Now you just go through here. Now this is of course one I made up, so there's not a project in Jim Hogg County. And that's not the zip code for Jim Hogg County anyway. But go through and make sure everything is correct. A lot of this information should have been pulled from your applicant profile. So if you see something incorrect here, that probably means it's incorrect on your applicant profile. I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. This page, in the years past, we had to actually enter the CFDA number. I tried to do it last night. I tried to delete it. I couldn't. It's pre-populated. So this whole page should be pre-populated for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Okay. So on this page, make sure to identify your congressional district. I made available to you some online resources, and one of those online resources will help you find your congressional district. That's on our website right here. It's just a Word document. You can just go here to find your district. So just do that if you need to complete that section. I think this one for me is Texas 23 is what I'm saying. Okay. Now this is important. Make sure that you put the start date and end date that coincides with the project you're applying for. Don't put the start date and end date that you want or the start date and end date that you think HUD wants. Use the start date and end date that is yours. So that also should be on your grant inventory worksheet. So for this sample, I'm going to say that my grant starts on March 1st, 2015, and it goes through the end of February. Always click Save with these pages just to make sure everything's correct. This, you can't fill out Section 18. Later on, you'll enter your funding information. Okay, click Next. Okay, you'll see this in the sample that I send. I'll have a note about this, but I've talked to the state about this every year, the person at the state that handles this, and what you should put for this is B, that yes, it is subject to review, but it's not been selected by the state. So just go ahead and do that. And then the only other part you have to fill out on this is number 20. If you have federal debt, of course, say that you do, provide an explanation, but if you don't, click No. Hit Save. Okay. Now on this next page, that's where you'll see that this list here on the left, this will expand. So you're declaring that this is correct. You hit Agree with the authorized representative's information. And just go ahead and click Save, and you'll see the project expand. See? Then you start seeing all the other sections that you have to complete. So what I would do for all of you renewal applicants, in addition to printing out the renewal application guide that HUD provides, I would also print out your last year's project application from eSnaps and have that also sitting beside your desk. Because for a lot of you, you will just be updating information from the last time that you applied. So just make it easy on yourself, print it out, have it right there. It'll make it easy for you to go through and input the information. Now there might be a few things that you want to change, like the project description or your performance goals, something like that. But for the most part, when you're renewing, you're just updating information. So use last year's. Use the one that you completed probably, you put your finishing touches on it probably last January. So you worked on it pretty recently. So I think it would still be very applicable for this competition. Okay, now this is one that I just created just now. I'm sorry, this project application folder is one I created just now. So I'm going to go out of it and work in one that I created last night, just because it will be easy for me to show you the different parts of this. Before I do that, it looks like there is one more question that's been asked. So the question is fiscal year 2014 renewal year a different year for other different projects? I'm sorry, I don't know that I understand the question, but fiscal year 2014 is a different year. It is a new year for all renewal projects, even if they applied during the fiscal year 2013 competition, which actually ended in February of 2014. They still need to apply to the fiscal year 2014 competition. If you want to, you can write in and ask the question a different way. Maybe I didn't understand. I'm sorry if I didn't. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to go back out to the submissions list. And I'm going to go into one that I named in a way that I said not to name an application. But we're just going to continue on with the same type of project application. So we're going to pretend that I got to the declaration page of this application, and I clicked agree and save, and everything else popped up. So we're going to continue on from there. Okay, I had a question come in from David Luxner. Good question, David. So I'm assuming you're asking, or am I showing a sample of a transitional or permanent supportive housing project? The answer is I'm going to try to show an example of as many different projects as there are out there. So when I go through, I may complete a page in several different ways. So I'll try to show you all the different options. No, regarding the renewal. Okay. So for transitional, there are several renewal projects. All of the renewal projects are either transitional, permanent housing, or supportive service only, or HMIS. So everyone is up for renewal. Okay. So when you get to section 2A, you're going to identify the project subrecipients. Now, I don't know that any of you have project subrecipients, but if you do, this is where you would enter them. You would click on this page, and you would enter their information. Is there anyone out there on this call that has a project subrecipient? Okay, well, we'll move on. But if you do, that's how you'll enter them and use HUD's guidance to help you out with that section. Okay, then you get to the project detail. And you can see, you'll see that number that we entered in earlier. That was the number from your grant inventory worksheet. And it pre-populated over here. I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback from somebody. Let's see if I can determine who it is. If you can mute yourself, please do. Hopefully the feedback will end. So let me just give me about a minute here. Let's see if I can figure out who this is. We were doing so good for a while. Yeah, go ahead and mute yourself. I think I figured out who it was. I'm sorry, Deanne Pilgrim, I had to mute you. So type in if you have a question. Okay, so on the project detail page, you'll see the expiring grant number. Just make sure that that is the correct expiring grant number. If it's not, then you'll have to go back up into the part 1 and make that change. When you get here to this section, you will not see the CoC number and name already filled out or already chosen. But this is what you'll choose. TX607 Texas Balance of State CoC. When you do that, you should see your CoC applicant name. Now, if you are an applicant that writes applications, or a user that writes applications for other agencies, you might see more than one applicant name. Just make sure you choose the correct applicant name for the project application you are completing. Then you'll name your project name. You can get that off of the grant inventory worksheet as well. I'll send that out again after this webinar. Your project status, all of you at this point, will be standard. So just click that. The component type, you're either going to be PH, TH, or SSO. PH is permanent housing, TH is transitional housing, SSO is supportive service only. HMIS is HMIS, and that's what we'll complete. Now, what you choose here may dictate what you see later on, so make sure you choose the correct component type. I'm sorry, does someone have a question? Okay. Thought I heard a question. If you do have a question, speak up, because I can't really hear you that well. Number 6 asks if Energy Star is used at one or more of the proposed properties. So, I mean, obviously, if it's used, push yes, or choose yes. If it's not, choose no. I think for most of your projects, that's, you know, Energy Star is used at this point. Okay, number 7, I don't think this applies to anybody. This is any project that uses properties that were conveyed through the Title V process, which is lands that were made available through HHS made lands available, federal surplus lands available to homeless assistance projects to create housing and other types of projects. So if you fall into one of those categories, then you would choose yes, or if you fall into that category, you would choose yes. I don't think there's anyone who fits into that, though. Okay, we had a question here from Victor on the component type. Can you only choose one? And yes, for this, you only choose one. I'll pick on MCEA here. So Montgomery County Emergency Assistance, they have 2 continuum of care projects. So what they'll do is when they're going through the permanent housing project that they have, they'll choose PH. Then they'll create another project applicant folder, and in that one they'll choose TH. So they'll have 2 separate applicant folders, so they'll have a different component type for each, but you can only choose one component type per project application. Okay, click Save and Next. With this, you can click Save and Next. Okay, project description. So be detailed, but succinct. So you need to do as good of a job in describing your project as you can with a limited number of characters. I forgot exactly how many characters that they allow you, but you're probably not going to feel that it's enough. If you're a renewal grantee, you may just want to look at what you wrote last year and put that in and edit that a little bit to match up with the detail or the description you would prefer to have now. Okay, under this section number 2. If If your project participates in a coordinated assessment system, you click yes or no. So for the Texas Balance of State, we're calling our coordinated assessment system Coordinated Access. So if you are in one of the cities where we're implementing coordinated access, you can choose yes to this. If you are not, choose no. I feel that you should know whether you choose yes or no on this. Maybe Mary, if you don't mind, could you type out the list of communities and put it in a chat box and just send it to everybody? I'm afraid I'm going to miss someone if I list it.
I can see a questions box, but not a chat box.
Oh, okay. I don't know if anyone else can. Well, let me see if I can get to it.
I can type it in questions, and you can copy it into a chat box.
That'll work. That'll work. Thank
right.
you. So you'll have that list soon. But I feel you should know. So if you do fit into one of those, please push yes. All right, I'm starting to get feedback from someone else. Okay. Go ahead and mute yourself if you can. Otherwise, I might have to mute everyone. All right, let me see if I can figure out who this is. Sorry, guys. Okay, is that better? Okay, when you get to number 3, you need to identify whether or not your project has a specific population focus. If it doesn't, you click no, and you can see that 3A disappears. Click yes, and 3A reappears. Okay, thank you, whoever just muted yourself. I'm not getting that feedback anymore. So most of you should have some specific population focus. So choose yes, then identify what that focus is. I'm just going to say chronic homeless and mental illness on this. If it's something other than those that are listed, you obviously would hit other and then type it in. Okay, you need to identify whether or not your project follows a housing first model. There is one of you, at least one of you, that I think has identified yourself as fully housing first. Actually, no, I don't think anyone has. That particular project, I will contact you, we'll talk about it. Hopefully we'll get a lot more of the applications in the future that will say yes to this. But for the most part, most of you will say no. Mary actually found a really good description of a housing first project yesterday, and we're going to put that up on our website, and we'll remember to email that out as well with the other documents from today. Okay, then you need to identify whether or not you are, if you're PH, whether or not you provide permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. Now obviously if you chose transitional housing earlier on, and we can go through later and do that, then this won't show up. But if you do choose PH, you need to identify whether it's PSH or rapid rehousing. Right now we have no continuum of care grant that's rapid rehousing. So if you're a permanent housing project, you need to choose PSH. When you do that, you see unlimited assistance is shown. If you had rapid rehousing, they would ask you to identify the maximum length of assistance, where you can see it has different durations there. But you're all PSH, so choose that. Then you need to identify whether or not you request funds under the rental assistance budget. Some of you changed to rental assistance last year or kept your projects as rental assistance. If you are rental assistance, you need to choose yes here. Many of you, the projects that are mental health authorities, you are rental assistance. So look at last year's grant and you can see whether or not you're that. For example, Shativa with the City of Longview, her project's rental assistance. The Gulf Coast Center in Galveston, their project their permanent housing project is rental assistance. So make sure to choose rental assistance if that's what you have. When you choose that, then you have to describe the method for determining the type, amount, and duration of the rental assistance. If you don't, say you're Montgomery County Emergency Assistance and you have permanent housing and you get that through, you get the funding for that through leasing, through the leasing line item, you choose no. So you do not complete 7B. But if you are rental assistance, you do complete 7B. And then also 7C. And 7C, just so everyone knows, there is no project that will fit into this category, this competition. We may have some that fit into the category in the 2015 competition, but not in the 2014. Okay, I'm going to click Save and Next, and then I'm going to answer a few questions here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put in, sorry, I'm going to copy and paste what Mary wrote over for coordinated access. Okay, you'll see all of the coordinated access cities in the chat box now. Okay, now these next few sections is where we start to get into some little bit more confusing areas. So bear with me on here on these sections. We'll work through these together. This one, 4A, supportive services for participants. Again, if you're a renewal applicant, you may want to just look at what you did last year and update that. But the key thing for this is for you to identify all of the supportive services that are provided through your project, whether you provide them, a subrecipient provides them, a partner or a non-partner provides them. Before you do that, though, you have to answer 1A and 1B, and I think we've established, at least with all of our renewal grantees, that they're going to vote, they're going to choose yes to both of these. You need to identify whether or not your policies and practices are consistent with laws relating to the provision of education services to individuals and families. And I hope that all of you can choose yes to this. Obviously, if you can't, choose no. And then if you need to identify whether or not you have a designated staff person to help out with the provision of those services, those education services. So if there are any projects that would choose no to either one of these, why don't you give me an email and explain why, and maybe we can talk through it. But I think most of you, in fact I think all of you, at least the renewal grantees, would choose yes to both of these. And don't be afraid to say that you're one of the no's right now if you want to ask a question about that. Okay, under number 2, you're going to list the different supportive services that are provided in the project. Not necessarily the ones that you provide, but the ones that are provided. So you should, I shouldn't say you should choose every one of these, but you should choose a lot of these. A lot of these will be needed by your project. So you just need to choose who provides it, what the level of access for that service is, and how frequently it occurs. So I'm saying with this project that sure, we provide assessment of service needs. Our case manager does that. We have scattered site locations, but that person will go on site and perform that service needs estimate. So I'm saying that I, as the applicant, provide that, and we do it at least monthly. Assistance with moving cost, we don't do that ourselves, but we have someone in the community that we partner with that does that. Now, this is going to be we'll say a vehicle share. We'll say that a local church helps us move people out from one of the units that we provide to one of their permanent housing units after they're done with the program. And this just occurs as needed. This could be someone that we're also working with. They're volunteering their time and their equipment to help us, and they're valuing that time and letting us use that as some of our leverage. So this would be important to have under our supportive services list. Case management, many of you will have funding to provide case management to your clients. If you do, make sure you choose applicant, or if a sub-applicant does it, if a sub-recipient does it, choose that. And then choose the level of access and how often it occurs. I think someone unmuted themselves. Does someone have a question? Okay. So you just continue to go down the list and identify what is provided, who it is that provides it, either the applicant, subrecipient, partner, or non-partner. Identify the level of access and how frequently it occurs. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're going through this is that this is going to link up to your supportive services budget. So if you identify that any services provided by the applicant or by a subrecipient in this section, it's going to look to see if you provided money in your supportive services budget for it. Or rather, if you provided money in your supportive services budget, it's going to look back at this section to see if you have an applicant or subrecipient listed. Now, obviously, if you haven't chose a subrecipient under 2A, you can't choose that here. So, for example, if I try to choose a subrecipient and click Save, you can see that the system's going to say, no, you can't do that because you have not identified any subrecipient for this project. And you also can't choose it as, say, a non-partner if you have funding in the supportive services budget for it. So I'm going to choose a non-partner right now. And I think right now it's not going to show any problem, but we'll look back into the supportive services budget and we'll see. Just keep in mind that you may get an error message in the supportive services budget depending on what you put in here. Okay, that's probably very confusing. So are there any questions about that? I'll try to provide good notes in my sample case to you about this too. Okay. Then on number 3, under this page, you need to identify how accessible most community amenities are to project participants. So just look at how far things like grocery stores, schools, things like that are from your project and answer the question. Hopefully, for the majority of you, it's very accessible. Okay, click Save. Always click Save first with anything you think might be attached to another page, and just go ahead and assume that every page is, and then hit Save and Next if you don't get an error message. Okay, so if you have a leasing or a rental assistance project, which a lot of you do, then you will fill out this section. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you have a housing project, you'll fill out this section. Now, I'm going to go ahead and act as if I haven't filled this out. If you need to identify a new housing type for your project, you click on the page with the orange plus. And once you click on that, it'll take you to another page. This is where you'll identify what the housing type is. So, oops. Sorry, my Iris scan went off. Okay, so you'll choose what the housing type is that you're identifying. Say you're a transitional housing project and you have a facility on site. So say it's a dormitory, so you'll choose that. Then you'll simply identify the number of units and beds. So we're going to say it's 8 rooms, and it's all for single males. It's 2 beds to a room, so we're saying 16 total beds. Then you use those numbers down on C and D, and you identify how many beds are dedicated to the chronically homeless. Well, earlier I said that one of the subpopulations I worked with was those that are chronically homeless. So I'm going to say all 16. And if I identified any that weren't dedicated to chronically homeless but still could be used for the chronically homeless, I would put that number here. I would hope for a lot of your projects that the remaining beds that you don't have for the chronically homeless could be used to house the chronically homeless, or at least for the permanent housing projects out there. Then you identify the address. Obviously, if you're a domestic violence shelter, you're going to use a P.O. box. I believe that the instructions say that. We'll see. Okay, it doesn't look like it says that, but I would do that. And look on the instructions that HUD provides, but I'm pretty sure it says that. Then you identify the geographic area that's associated with this address. Unfortunately for us in the balance of state, we cover a lot of different areas. And actually this includes every area in the state of Texas, so you may have to click through. It may take a while. So last night when I was going through to try to find Jim Hogg County, of course, it was right at the very back. Well, at least I thought it was. There it is, yeah. So you just have to click through to find what you need, then you move it over. If you're satisfied with your entry, you can either click Save just to make sure it all saves, or if you're sure of your data entry, click Save and Back to List. You should identify as many housing types as you have in your project in this section. For, I think, probably the majority of you, you'll have one housing type. So you won't have a listing, 2 different listings. If you make a mistake on one, you can delete it like that. Just click the red dot with the white X in it. Now this is what I'm going to use as the sample. Remember, I'm saying that my project is permanent housing and it's scattered site. And I'm saying that we're using scattered site apartments, which could include efficiencies. And this is where it gets a little complicated, so I had to make little notes out for myself, and do that for yourself if you can too. And again, look at last year. Also, one more thing, if you're a renewal grantee, when you're filling out this section, make sure you look at what you're funded to do. We have some projects that were funded to provide, say, 10 units and 17 beds, but because they receive more money than they thought, or more money that they originally budgeted for that through increases in fair market rent, they're able to provide, say, 12 units and 21 beds. You need to put in this section and on your application what you're contracted to do by HUD. So if you put in 12 units and 21 beds, that now becomes what you're contracted to do by HUD. So you need to put in either what you are currently contracted to do or what you're comfortable doing in the next project year. And I would stick with what you're contracted to do and then just do over and above that if you can. Is there any questions about that before I move on? Okay. So in this scenario, what I'm saying is that I have beds for single households without children, and then households with children. So singles and families. So I'm going to say that 5 of my units are 1-bedroom apartments, and they are for single males or females. The other 5 units are broke down between 3 units for households with children that are all 3 2-bedroom apartments, and the remaining units are 2 3-bedroom units for households with children. So in total we have 10 units and 17 beds, and I'll explain how we get to the 17 beds in a second. But then identify what beds are dedicated to the chronically homeless. And what I'm saying is that 5 single beds are dedicated to the chronically homeless. Now I'm a renewal permanent housing grantee, so I can't have a certain number of beds dedicated to chronically homeless and a certain number that aren't. Now, if you're new, you're going to have to dedicate all chronically homeless, all of your beds to chronically homeless if you're permanent supportive housing. But in this scenario, I have the 5 units for singles that are dedicated to the chronically homeless. But then I identify that my 12 other beds could be used for the chronically homeless if they're not already occupied. Then here I'm identifying, actually the address I identify here is my main address where my case manager works. So basically kind of our headquarters for the project, if you will. And then I select the geographic area associated with this address. So I'm going to take a couple of seconds and see if anyone has questions. All right, no questions. Okay. Feel free to ask them later when we have Q&A, as long as we have time for that. Looks like we will. Okay, if you are satisfied with what you have in here, put Save and Back to List, or click on Save and Back to List. And then you'll see the breakdown here. It populates over from what you put in the section we were just in. And then if everything looks good, press Save and Next. And then we'll identify HMIS participation. Now, first of all, you need to identify whether or not your project provides client-level data at HMIS, at least annually. The majority of you are using HMIS, so you would choose yes to this. Then you're going to need to identify the number of clients you served from January 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2013. Now this does not match up with, in fact I don't think it matched up with any of your APRs or any of your most recent APRs. If it does, then you're in luck, you can use that number. But if it doesn't, what you'll need to do is run an annual performance report, or APR, for your project using this date frame. What I would do if you get to this section, or before you even get to this section, call up Caleb and Shannon and say, hey, I need help running these numbers. They can certainly help you with that. You can say, hey, Eric said that we can just run an APR for this date frame. Can you help me, show me how to do that so I can run it myself, get the numbers, and then get the information for data quality. So it's really easy to do. So just ask for help if you need to from them. Then you'll know how to do it. So you'll identify the number of clients you served, and I guess it's possible that in some cases that number could exceed this number, but as long as you're entering everyone in HMIS, those numbers should be the same. 2A and 2B should be the same. And again, you'll get this off your APR. It'll list the total number of clients served. And then I think the very next section on the APR, if it's not the next section, it's one of the, it's 2 or 3 sections down, is the section on data quality. And you'll simply pull the numbers from that section and input into here, the percentages. The percentages I included in here, it just represents one person out of 25 that either refused to give us their social security number or didn't know it, and then one person out of 25 that we did not have their last zip code, last permanent address zip code. So when I've looked at reports like this in the past, most of you have had really good data quality percentages, so I expect that'll probably remain the same this year. Any questions about that?
Yes, Eric, since we don't use the HMIS, what do we put? Do we fill it out still as best as we can?
I'm glad you asked that, so let's choose no here. Okay, then it's going to say, well, why don't you? And then you probably remember this. Yeah, and then you say federal law prohibits, and then you can say, well, I'm a domestic violence shelter. So for you, Women Inc., Families in Crisis, I know I'm going to miss someone out there. Well, anyone involved with, well, domestic violence prevention would fall under this, but I don't think your entire grant falls under this. You guys might be the only ones. So if you're a domestic violence shelter, that's where you'll choose no to this. You click Save and Next. For those of you in Corpus Christi, you may have well, actually, I don't think you will have trouble running this because you'll be running it on old data. But get with us if you do have trouble, and we can help you with that. Okay, there's a question that came in. Okay, that's a good question, Victor. Let me go back to that section. So Victor Maldonado asked, are these numbers for all of our programs or for a particular program? So when you're reporting these numbers, you're going to report the numbers for the program you're applying for. So really this applies to renewal grantees, Victor. So they'll just be reporting on the number of clients served with this particular project. For you, you won't be asked a question like this because I can't assume that you've been using HMIS or that you're a domestic violence provider that has a CoC grant. So that is a good question. Okay, we'll go on to the next section. Okay, this is the section that if you've worked on this in the past, it can get really confusing. So let's take some time on this, and please ask questions if you have them about this as we go through. And I will say, I'll be honest and say that I have used a really easy example for myself so I can explain this. Your reality may not be this simple, but I think it can be simplified by doing it the way I'm going to show you. Okay, so in this section, you're going to identify all your project participants. You're going to break it down by households first, and then by characteristics. So what I would suggest you all start with, and it's going to seem, it's not intuitive, but you start with this column here, housing with only children. The reason I say you start with this column is because most of you will not have anybody in this. There actually, I think, is just one project now, and I don't know if they're on here, but Central Texas Youth Services Bureau might be the only project that has households with only children. For the rest of you, you're going to put zeros in each one of these rows. So just go ahead and start by doing that, because if you don't put zero, the system's going to say there's something wrong here. Well, it didn't say it after I said that. But go ahead and put zeros. I believe it will say that in the end. But go ahead and complete that. Then I think it's easiest to go next to this section, adult households without children. Because when you start throwing children into the mix, it starts getting real complicated. not only in real life, but also with this table. And I know now how complicated it can get in real life and on this table. But so start with your households without children, because that's going to be the easiest to use. Now, if you'll remember my example, I have 10 total units, and 5 of those are for households without children. Those are the 5 single persons in the 1-bedroom apartments. Now, also remember that I said that we provide services to the chronically homeless. So I'm going to say, and also our 5 1-bedrooms, our 5 beds for households without children, are the ones that we dedicate to the chronically homeless. So they all have to have a disability. So you can see that I'm saying we have 4 adults over 24 and 1 adult between the ages of 18 and 24. So that's households without children. So that's really easy. You can see the rest of this is grayed out. You may have a transitional housing project in which you'll have, say, 10 households without children. 8 of those households could be single persons. 2 of those households could be a person with their spouse. So you're going to have what? It's going to be 12 people that you're going to have to account for. So it would be 10 here, and then you would account for 12 people down here. In this case, there's 5 households, 5 people. So this accounts for 5 persons. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. I know there's got to be some questions about this, but let me get to the next column and we'll see if there's no questions. Okay, when you're done with that column, again, move to the left. And this is where you're going to tackle the households with at least 1 adult and 1 child. Okay. So if you remember, I said that in this project we have 5 households, well, we have 5 units for households with children. And our project participants that we have at any given point that we are contracted to provide services to would be 5 households with children. And of those, we expect that the heads of households will make up 6 people. I'll explain this in a second. But of those 6, 3 are disabled adults over age 24. 1 is a non-disabled adult over 24. And 2 are disabled adults 18 to 24. And I'm also saying there are 0 non-disabled adults 18 to 24. The reason there are 6 heads of households, or 6 heads of households in the 5 households is because one of the households is a person with their spouse. So in one of the apartments, they share 1 bed. In one of the units, they share 1 bed. And so that's why we have that number of beds instead of, I think the extra number would be 18. All right, so first of all, you break down the heads of households in these sections. And then you just look at the number of children. And so, and I'll have this with my notes that I send you. But I break down the households with children. So in the 3 households that are in the 2-bedroom apartments, 2 of the households are 1 parent, 1 child. So that totals 2 parents, 2 children. And then the remaining household is 2 parents, 1 child. So that makes 4 parents, 3 children total. Then in the other 2 units, the other 2 households, they are 3-bedroom apartments. And they are both, in both households, there are 1 parent, 2 children for a total of 6 people. And again, keep in mind there are only 17 beds because the two-parent household uses one bed for both parents. Okay. Now there's got to be questions about this, because I'm getting confused by just listening to myself talk. But what I would do, and this is what helped me, and think of your question while I'm explaining this. Let me click Save and Back. You could write it out the way I have and the way you'll see it in my sample. But print out the different pages to help you along the way. So it helped me whenever I was completing that section. It helped me to print this off and look at this. So I printed this off, and I kept in mind what type of household occupied what unit, what person occupied what bed. I wrote that all out in some notes I kept for myself. And then I went back to that section. Let me just go back to the section. 5A households. And that really helped me complete that section. Okay, are there any questions about this? Okay, let me just show you if you write in something and it doesn't match up. It's not going to say it here, but it will say it on the next page. So eSnaps can be a little frustrating that way. Okay, there are no questions. I'm asking that. There are no questions. Okay. Well, we'll move forward. So 5A is one that you should spend your time on and make sure you get it right. Click Save and Next. And this is another one that's a little confusing. And again, like I printed off the housing detail for 5A, I then printed off 5A to help me with this section, 5B, because this can be a little confusing as well. So again, I started with households with only children, and I quickly learned that I don't have to fill anything out with this as long as I didn't include any numbers on 5A. So that's done. Then I went up to persons in households without children, and I'm just going from easiest to hardest, and that's why I'm working up this way. So first of all, look at how many people you have. So it's really easy in this scenario. You have 5 persons with households without children. So all you need to do is break down that number. So look at your page, and I said that on, I'm sorry, look at your page 5A. And on page 5A, I said that there were 4 people over the age of 24. So you know right now that those 4 people have to be in these 2 rows for this section, the section that's grayed out. That's the section you're filling out first. So these 4 people have to be in one of these 6 slots. Okay. So, and also remember on 5A I said they were both disabled. So if they're both disabled, they have to be in these slots. So I would just narrow down your options until you get to where you know what slots that they have to fill in. So I'm looking at my scenario, and I'm identifying one person as chronically homeless and non-veteran, and the other people as chronically homeless veterans. So out of the 4, this is how it breaks down. Then in my scenario on 5A, there was one person that was within the age group of 18 to 24, and that person was listed as disabled on 5A. So you know that that person has to be listed in this row. They have to be in one of these slots. We've already eliminated these slots and all of the slots here. I'm saying that this person is a chronically homeless non-veteran. So that's the way you fill that out. Fill out the gray section first. These 4 rows and these 3 columns you fill out first. Then and only then you get into these sections, this lighter gray section. And if you'll see in here, the numbers don't seem to match up. That's because for these categories in the light gray, the subpopulations, people can fit into more than one. So I can have, despite the fact that there are just 4 people in this row, I can have 3 that are chronic substance abusers, 3 that are mentally ill, and 2 that have physical disabilities. So maybe I'm serving veterans who have come back and they've fallen into homelessness, and they were disabled in combat, and they've suffered from PTSD, and they're medicating themselves. That one person that has that disability, has PTSD, and is medicating himself could be in each one of these categories. So start with this section first. Let's see. Start with this section first, and then go on to this section. Any questions about that before I move on to the families or the households with children? Okay. So I just approached the next section the same way. Households with at least 1 adult and 1 child. I had my printed off copy of 5A, the section right before this, and I looked at, okay, for my adults, we're looking at these 4 rows, just like we had 4 rows down here. For those over age 24, I had 3 people listed with disability, 1 without. So you already know that those 3 have to be in these spaces in this row. And then that 1 remaining non-disabled adult over 24 has to be in one of these spaces. So I just put them in the place that I had for my scenario. 2 were chronically homeless non-veterans, 1 chronically homeless veteran, and then the person, non-disabled person over 24, which is a spouse living with the head of household with the disability, is a non-chronically homeless veteran. Then I looked at the number of adults 18 to 24, and I had 2. So I knew that those 2 had to be in either of these rows, and they actually were both labeled as people with disabilities. So they have to be in this row, and I chose to put them in the chronically homeless non-veteran and chronically homeless veteran. Were they about to ask a question? Thought I heard someone about to speak up. And then all you do is you identify the number of kids. And you, again, just like below, you do this section first, then you go into this section and complete it. I don't think for any of you that you'll have anybody in these columns. If you think you will, let me know. But if you put anyone in these columns, what it's doing is it's identifying a number that's over and above what you have listed here. So let me just show you. I'm going to put 1 here. Okay. And see, it's going to tell you that it does not, this number does not correspond with the number entered under 5A. So I would just stay away from this column if I were you, unless you were sure that you have someone that should be listed in here. And I think really the only way you're going to be sure is if you completed a renewal application last year and you had to put one in then. So, but call me later if that's something that you think you need to do. Okay, any questions about this table? There's got to be questions about this table. move forward. So those are the most, I will say, sections part 4 and part 5 I find to be the most complicated, and the sections that we discover the most mistakes, and the section that we seem to help people out with the most. So that's why I spent a lot of time on it. Okay, if there are no questions about that, I'm going to move on to 5C. In this section, I'll make this a little bigger. In this section, you're identifying where you outreach for participants. Basically, where are participants before they come into your program? If you're a renewal grantee, look at what you put last year. Most likely you'll put the same thing. Also keep in mind what's eligible for your project. So if you're permanent housing, the majority of your clients, and probably in most cases, all of your clients are going to come from these categories. So just make sure that not only you're aligning with what you did before, you're also aligning with HUD regs. I think we have one program that has this add up to less than 100%, and then they identify why that happens on number 2. I don't think there's anyone else that would fall into that category, so I'm not really going to spend any time on that. Unless you have a specific question about that. That one program that does that is a youth shelter, and there is a good reason for that. And I don't know if I want to get into that right now, if you don't mind. I don't want to further confuse anybody. Okay. 6A, you get to your standard performance measures. All right, so keep in mind with what you're doing here is you're identifying what measure you're applying to your program, or what level of performance you're applying to your program for the project you're applying for. So most of you will be applying for a project year 2015 through 2016. So what you're doing here is you're saying, okay, in that year, here's how many people I'm going to help, and here's how many people who are going to meet this performance target. And when you fill out your annual performance report, you're going to have to report on, again, you have to report against that number. So you're either going to be able to say, yeah, I made that goal, or you're going to have to explain why you did not meet that goal to HUD in your annual performance report. So what you put in here does go into your APR, your annual performance report. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that you want to shoot for goals that this continuum of care is identified as targets, and that HUD is identified as targets. If you, for the most part, if you meet our targets, you're meeting HUD's targets. If you need to see what those targets are, go to our website and pull down the renewal project evaluation. At the end of it, you can see those targets. For example, we have a target for those that remain in permanent housing at the end of the operating year. I think it's 83%. So you want to try to meet those targets as much as you can, but you also want to be realistic for your program. So you got to keep two things in mind. You're going to be reporting to HUD against these targets in your APR, and you want to, as much as you can, match up with the targets that we've identified as high performing for our continuum of care. So there's a lot to think about right here, but keep all that in mind. And when you're filling this out, what you should fill out first is your universe. So if you'll remember earlier, I identified the number of people that were served in the project year, the 2013, not project year, but calendar year. And I identified that number as 25. So I've identified 25 people as generally coming out of my project throughout the year. So we have some that stay in for a long time. We have some that come and go. So your universe is the number of people that you'll serve. That's not your target. That's not your performance measure. That's the total number of people you'll serve. Then you're going to look at that 25 and you're going to say, okay, how many people out of that 25 remained in permanent housing at the end of the year? And I'm saying 22. I'm setting a pretty high goal for my program. And then when I click Save, that target percentage will show up. It's already shown up because I've already done it. But before you put that in there, there will be no target percentage. So you should just look at that, be realistic about the number of people you'll serve, and then the number of people that will achieve that target. And then you need to choose one of the income measures below under number 2. And one thing you might want to keep in mind with this is that the targets that HUD publishes and that we use for our CoC are lower than what I have here. So look at what we have and look at how you have performed in the past. You can look at your APR to give yourself a good idea, but you'll do the same thing. You'll identify the number that will be served that could apply for this income measure. Just remember, it's persons age 18 or older for this particular measure. You identify the universe, and then you identify the target that achieves that goal. And then when you click Save, the target percentage will show up. Any questions about that?
Yes, I have one.
Okay.
When you say persons, are you talking about the adults? You're not talking about all the children that are with the adults, are you?
Well, it depends on what measure it is. I'm pretty sure
The first one.
the first one is everyone.
It's everyone. Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure it's everyone. I can look that up and make sure everyone knows after this.
Okay.
In your APR, it should clearly identify that. But that one, I'm pretty sure it's everyone. But when I email you out the materials, I'll also put that in the email. So, Mary, can you help me remember to do that? Okay.
Yeah, I think in the instructions right there, if you go up to the top, it says, as you were scrolling up, I thought I saw it, if permanent housing, count each participant who is still living in your units, in addition to clients who have exited. And then contrast that with the income measure where it says persons age 18 and older,
right,
and persons age 18 through 61. That might be helpful. But yes, I'll make a note. We'll follow up on that.
Okay, yeah, it does seem to indicate that it would be everyone that you would count. Any other questions about that? Okay, 6B. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Only to say that keep in mind this is optional. You do not have to use this at all. If you do use this, make sure it's something, I would say, make sure it's something you can achieve, because this will be on your annual performance report. You don't need to choose additional performance measures to make us happy. Only do so if you think it's a good measure of your project. Now, there are some projects out there, I think Community Health Corps, they use this because they really do track those measures, and those measures are important to them. If you do have measures like that, then yes, please put those in. But don't put something in just to put something in. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, funding request. All right, when you get down to this page, if you don't know what you should put, pull out your grant inventory worksheet. This is going to help you out a lot with the remaining pages. So first of all, you need to go through and answer a few questions. You need to identify whether or not you have a project that has a restrictive covenant. If you have one of those projects, you know it. So choose yes. You need to identify whether or not this project was awarded as a Samaritan bonus, or a project, or a permanent housing bonus project. And I think that's no for everyone. Now, we have had some CoCs merge with us fairly recently. So in Corpus Christi, you may have had one of those, but I don't know that you. If it was, I don't know which project that would be. So you may want to check with the person that used to lead your CoC before you became part of the Texas Balance of State CoC, if you're unsure about that. But I'm pretty sure that everyone would answer no to this. Number 3, everyone's going to answer no. We don't have any renewal projects that are the result of reallocation presently. Hopefully we will in the next few competitions. If you are allocating funds with an indirect cost rate, you need to identify that. With all of these, look at these instructions above here, and also look at your HUD guidance. The way I've answered it for this, that's the way most of you are going to answer it. But if you're unsure, look at the guidance, look at last year's application, or email us or call us with the question. But this is the way that most of you will answer it. Then on number 6, this is the important part, I think, of this page. You're going to put check marks by the major line items for which you receive funding. So this is what I'm saying. Look at your grant inventory worksheet if you're unsure. If on your grant inventory worksheet it says that you have funding expected to come from leased structures, check that. Check each box that the grant inventory worksheet indicates you should receive funding for. In this project, I'm saying rental assistance and supportive services. So those are the pages that will populate if I do that. If I choose operations and hit save, you'll see on the left-hand side, 7F now shows up. Before it didn't. And now I'm going to hit save without it. And you can see that it's gone. So whatever you expect to request funding from, what the major line item that you expect to request funding for, make sure you have checked that. Check those boxes. Any question about that? The question came up last year a lot. Should I choose HMIS if I'm not an HMIS provider? What you should choose if you're spending some of your grant on HMIS, which of course we would encourage you to use other money to pay for HMIS so we can use that as match. But if you have to use this program, this grant program for HMIS, you would put that under supportive services. You would write that in as a line item. So you click Save and Next. If you have rental assistance, actually let me go back and check one more thing here. Say we have leased units. I'm going to click Save because a lot of you do fall into this category. So if you have leased units, you're going to see a leased units budget. It's going to be very similar to the rental assistance budget that I'll show in a second, but let me click on this. You click on the paper with the orange plus. Then you identify your major metropolitan fair market rent area. If you need help with this, again, go to our online resources, and you can see the FMR listing. Let's see. I'm just going to choose one at random here. When you do that, it should, it will identify for the system the FMR that is allowed. And then you go through and you identify the number of units you have per bedroom size. And you can click Save. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one other thing you should do. Go to your grant inventory worksheet if you're a renewal grantee, and the amount that you have for leasing, put that amount in here. So, excuse me. All right. Any questions about that? Okay. So you complete that, and if you have a rental assistance project, you do it much the same way. This is one that I've already completed. If you have rental assistance, you need to identify whether or not it's project-based, sponsor-based, or tenant-based. And this one I'm saying sponsor-based. With this, you can see it's a little bit more outlined, a little bit better than the leasing project. So you identify the number of units. I'm sorry, after you've identified the fair market rent area, then you'll see that these amounts will pop up. Look at the fair market rent numbers that are on the online resources that I provide, and make sure that they match up with this. In the past, we have had some problems with that. HUD hasn't updated things as quickly as the grant is updated, or the grant came out before their FMR numbers are updated in eSnaps. So you might need to make sure that this is up to date. If it's not, work with us and we'll try to make a fix. I remember last year we had to, I think we had to identify one unit, say under 9 bedrooms or something like this, for the remainder of the dollars allowed. So, you know, if we need to do something like that, work with us to help you do that. Otherwise, just put in the number of units that you had. And remember, in my scenario, I said there's 5 1-bedrooms, 3 2-bedrooms, and 2 3-bedrooms, these 2 being for the households with children. And when I put that all in, I hit save, and it adds up to $74,544. Check that also. Check it against one other thing. Check it against your grant inventory worksheet, and let's see if that matches up. So hopefully it will. Okay, any questions about that? Actually, I'm going to stop. It looks like there's a question that was written in. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's just someone informing them that they're having to leave. So any questions about that? Okay. I'm going to say save and back to list. Click next. Okay, so supported services budget. You're going to go through and identify any supported service that is paid for through this grant, the quantity and description, and the amount that is paid for. For a lot of you, you won't have a whole lot of entries in this section. Unfortunately, HUD doesn't provide a lot of supportive service dollars, so that makes this section pretty easy to complete. You can see, as I mentioned earlier, that if you include something that's not provided by a recipient or subrecipient, you will get an error message. And in this case, I believe it's the bus passes. So let's see if I take that out. You know what, actually, let me just go back to that section so I can look at it. So I go back to 4A, and I can see that, yes, under transportation, I have public-private regional transportation provided by a non-partner, but in the supportive services budget, I had money listed for that. So I have to take that out. Now, with cases like that, keep in mind that if you're providing money for that bus pass or some other entity is providing money for those bus passes, that can be used to your match or to your leverage. So any type of amount like that, any funding amount like that, keep record of so you can use that in those sections. Any questions about the support services budget? Okay. Save and next. Next you'll get to the match leverage. You can see that these are calculated separately. Keep in mind that we need 150% leverage, and I know that's a lot, so get creative with it. I mean, be truthful, but get creative with it. What you're going to do is you're going to identify each source. What I would start with is the match. Identify how much match you're going to need. And what you're going to look at is the total number of dollars that you are asking for within your major line items. So in this case, it's leasing, rental systems, and supportive services. For all of your leased dollars, you do not match. For things like rental systems and supportive services or operations, you do match it by 25%. So take that total and multiply it by 0.25% or 0.25. That will give you the amount of money that you need to come up with in match. So I would try to identify that first, get that out of the way, identify that, write up the match commitment letter for it, and input that in here. So you can see for me, I'm saying that the Sampleville Homeless Shelter is providing a cash match of $31,000, and that's actually not going to cover my match requirement under this scenario because of the rental assistance I put in, but it did under the scenario before. So you need to look at gathering that match first, and for each one of these entries, whether it be match or leverage, you're going to have a commitment letter for it. So you don't need to attach it to your project application, but you do need to send it in to us. And you can attach it to your project application if you want at the end of that, the eSnaps workflow. I'll show you where. But for your match, I think it's probably easiest just to keep that cash match and have it pay for things like the remaining funding that you need for supportive services, or the amount of money that your coordinator or director, the amount of time that your coordinator or director spends on the project, but is not paid for by the grant. So come up with that amount first. Then I start identifying all of your leverage entries, and this is where you'll put a lot of your in-kind donations. Keep in mind, if you're counting volunteer hours, it's $10 per hour. If you have, say, a lawyer in your community that provides pro bono services, you would get that person's hourly rate, estimate the number of hours that person will be helping you with throughout the year, put on letterhead that total amount, put that in as an entry. Donations, everything has to be valued, and there has to be a letter written up for it. And if you worked on your application last year or the last competition, look at what you used for leverage then. And if you still have relationships with those partners, ask them if you can get another letter of commitment signed. I think that's probably the easiest way to do this for you. Any questions about match and leverage?
Eric, the
Yes.
federal money hasn't come through for BoC and VAWA, and that's quite a bit of money for us, but we do have an assurance that of the amount we're going to get. So can we just put that with the grant that we've applied online and the amount that we're going to get?
Yeah, and you can do that. That's the quick answer. And there are a lot of projects like yours. We're like that too. So one of the things that we always identify is we receive money from Department of State Health Services. And almost every time we apply, we don't really know that for sure that we're going to get it the next year. But we've been getting it for so many years that we feel like we should get it the next year. So we count that. But if at all possible, I try to use those dollars as leverage and not as match. There have been some years that we've had to use it as match too. But the match I like to use as sure dollars as possible. Leverage, you may want to use some of those dollars where there's a chance that you may not get that funding, but you do expect to get it, and you feel comfortable signing a letter saying you're going to get it. But yeah, there's a lot of projects like yours that will have to use some of that federal or state funding that they don't have that commitment of funding yet.
Okay, and just one more question. The leverage amounts, is every dollar supposed to be used for this project, or is it just monies that we take in?
No, it's for this project.
Okay, so
yeah.
So like our income for a thrift store, we wouldn't use the whole amount of that then.
No, and what you're going to do in all cases like that, say at your location there, you work on this project and a case manager works on this project. So you would look at the square footage that both of you occupy. And this is going to seem really complicated just to get to a small amount of match or leverage in this, but this is how you have to do it. Look at the square footage that you occupy, how much that square footage is worth, and then multiply that times the percentage that you work on this project. So say you work on it 25% of the time, and it's $1,000 a month. When you break it all down, it's probably actually not that much, but you break it all down for your percentage of the square footage, then you would multiply that 25% by that amount. So it can get really confusing. You know what? I'll try to put out some samples. If I may email some of you and ask if I can use some of your old leverage letters as samples. I'll try to black out the names and everything. So if you get that email from me, if you can just let me know that we can use them, yes or no, and we'll put them out there for other people to see. Because there's a lot of things that people don't think about whenever they're coming up with leverage. Okay, there's some questions that have been typed in. Yeah, leverage is, yes, the question was asked, is leverage 150% of the grant amount? Yes, it is. And I know that's a lot. Actually, Mary points out some good information. We do have some. She asked if we have match and leverage guidance on our website. And I do have some guidance. I have something from another CoC that gives people ideas on what to use for match and leverage. But we'll also provide one other piece of guidance that just outlines the difference between match and leverage. Keep in mind with match, that's what HUD's going to ask you for. After awarded funding, whenever you have to send in all your information as part of the C1.9A, basically your conditional award response that you have to do in eSNAPs now, they're going to ask you to submit to them or upload to eSNAPs those commitment letters for match. Leverage, they're not asking for that right now, but you do have to submit that as part of your project application. Oh, and Mary points out that, yeah, and leverage is separate from, match is separate from leverage. And I think HUD's really trying to make that clear by separating them on this page. So, and I know it's tough, but so that basically means you have to come up with that 25% match, and then on top of that, you have to come up with 150% in leverage. So, while we don't have a tremendous amount of time to assist, we may be able to assist you with some of this, and we'll try to do most of that through providing you samples. But if you really get desperate, give us an email, ask for some ideas. We'll see what we can brainstorm with you. I think last year most of you came really close to 150. I think many of you went above that because we were shooting for 165 at that time. So I think a lot of you will be just fine if you do something similar to last year. And the reason we ask for so much is not because we're trying to be difficult. HUD gives points to CoCs that have an average among their projects of 150% leverage or more. So those points are very useful when it comes to HUD deciding what CoC projects get funded and what projects don't. I'm convinced that because we had a high leverage percentage last year and because of a few other things, we had nearly all of our projects funded, and all of the projects we wanted funded were funded. And I think it's because we scored a little higher than in some other CoCs for reasons like that. And so that's why we ask for that high leverage percentage. Okay, next. So you'll see your summary budget. This amount for admin will not be filled in. You'll need to fill it in. This is actually not correct right now because I added rental assistance. This says you can add up to 10%. If you're a renewal grantee, okay, I'm going to say two things. If you're a renewal grantee, use what's on your grant inventory worksheet. Use that number for admin. That's on your grant inventory worksheet. That's what you have to use because that's what you've been approved by HUD to do. If you're a new project, I really would encourage you to keep it at 7% or lower. That's also because HUD gives points to CoCs in which all the projects have asked for 7% or lower for admin. And again, those points can mean the difference between one or more of our projects being funded or not. All of the renewal projects you're already at 7% or less, and you're only able to ask for what's on the grant inventory worksheet anyway. I've mentioned the grant inventory worksheet a lot, so we'll definitely send that out after this. It's getting close to noon, so I'm kind of moving forward, so stop me if you need to. Okay, here is a section where you can provide attachments. Attachments are not required here, but if you want, earlier I said that you could attach the match or leverage letters. If you wanted to take all of those letters, put them in your scanner and scan them all as one document, you can upload them here to other attachments. You would just describe what it is, choose the file, and then upload it from your computer. Either way, you need to send it to us as part of your application package. Some project applicants just find it easier to upload DSNAP, so they always have it right there, no matter whose computer they're working off of. But even if you upload it, you still need to send it to us as a separate electronic file. Okay, and then you just get to the end, to the certification. Once you're all good to go, you're going to make sure all this information is correct. You click check, and then that will allow you to hit submit when you're ready. Well, once you have everything filled out, there's some things I don't have filled out. If you look down through here, you can see if there's anything that still needs to be completed. For example, the description was incomplete, so I needed to complete it. Housing type was incomplete, so I needed to complete it. And then if there are any notes or issues identified, you'll see them here. And you can click on those. See where it says please complete. I can click on that section and it'll take me to it, or if there are notes, I can click on that section and it'll take me to it. So any questions? That's the project application.